the political and cultural discourse, which often involves a fallacy of metonymic representation throughout the Balkans. The oppositional conceptualization between Christian and Muslim, for example, is part of a series of antithetical pairs, such as primitive or civilized categories, all of which significantly represented by the categories of masculine, feminine, and male and female. More specifically, against the civilized culture of certain category of people, the behavior of people of opposite categories is often taken to be fanatic, as a mark of their backwardness. Representation of fanaticism often relate to religious matters, but first and foremost, they are located in the context of family relation, with a more marked subordination of women to male authority perceived as a feature of fanaticism. Pairs of opposite, including civilized democrat or patriarchal fanatic, are available as fundamentalist and sexist label to be pinned conspicuously to debase or exalt identities. This the dichotomist representation of gender relation and religious affiliation may well have no relation to real practice, and in mixed local community, for example, Christian and Muslim, may make the same representation about each other, just as men and women may have everywhere the same prejudice and stereotypes about each other, but always with a certain shift in relation to reality. Beyond doubt, this kind of characterization of territorial or social group as bearer of one or another cultural mentality may be identified as Balkanism and is part of nesting Orientalism. Similarly, in another article on fertility trends, marriage pattern, and savant typology in Albanian context, published last year in the Journal of Family History, it is a kind of speculative literalism and typologies, mainly through the reading of the data, in current scholarship, which seems to be responsible for constructing a taken-for-granted view that associates fertility rates in Albania more closely with the existence of patriarchal cultural trait. It seems to me, at least, that in the standard literalist and typologist view, the cultural myths and ideologies associated with patrilineality are conflated with the actual practice of patriarchy. In my view, it is too easily assumed that the patriarchal language and discourses that symbolically support patrilineality result uniformly in outcomes and practices that are simply patriarchal. While I do not dispute the notion of Albanian family system being patriarchal, like Christophe said this morning, welcome to France. This standard view conflates patrilineality with patriarchy and seems to assume that evidence of patrilineality is evidence of patriarchy. The historical, ethnographic, and demographic evidence must be examined against a much more nuanced theoretical perspective to sort out some of the complexity of patrilineal kinship structure and patriarchal ideological and practices, which are not the same. In France, we have patriarchy, we don't have patrilineality. It's the same in Albania. We think that we have patrilineality, but we have in Albania the same social structure as in France. The kinship system in Albania is bilateral, like that in France. And we may find historically some traces, very old traces of patrilineal structure. But the system is bilateral, like that in France. So patriarchy is not necessarily related to patrilineality. So, arguably, I would say that the ideological dimension of the myth of many children within the so-called patriarchal Albanian family is commonly constructed and conveyed in academic writing, the press, and stereotyped opinion, but invalidated if we take what is put forward as empirical evidence to be nothing else but a strong cultural activism. Gender relation, as much as religious affiliation, cannot be objective criteria for defining group, but rather categories for thinking about groups. They seem essentially to be instrumental political resources for ascertaining hierarchical relations among social group and individual, with women often used as a currency of exchange within a system of matrimonial relation. The big term is already said, women as a currency of exchange. And we know that this notion has a venerable history in a venerable place in the history of anthropological thought. And we know who is responsible for that, especially in a French context. Yet, if Lévi-Strauss is to be taken seriously, we must agree that women are assumed to be not merely exchange objects linked in a formal power structure, but they must also be subject in history and everyday social life. In his kinship theory, women are exchanged between groups of men on the basis of rules of exogamy and prohibition of incest. This form of matrimonial form is assumed to provide communication between separate social groups and ultimately to ensure the integration of human society as a whole. In this kind of elementary structure of kinship, women are seen as being a part of a certain type of communication, like a speech, say Lévi-Strauss, that is misused when they are not exchanged and communicated. Even though Lévi-Strauss does not go at denouncing what kinship systems do to women, there is something of a contradiction here, which amounts to a recognition of women's agency, since women speak at the same time as they are spoken, insofar as they are communicated in their value quality of sign and they communicate in their value quality of producer of signs. Actually, a strong female agency can be shown to be real in Albanian context and throughout the Balkan, at least on 3 different levels. Historically, for example, in the case of crypto-Christianity, and female self-determination of celibacy. Anthropologically, as a paradox of patrilineal structure of social organization, and behaviorally, I would say, as a shortcoming of the standard demographic approach. I leave the historic approach, maybe also the anthropological approach, and behaviorally, despite, I can say, despite the rapid social transformation from the middle of 20th century that Ariane mentioned, Albania continued to be considered exclusively as a country that has been, and to a certain extent, still supposed to remain a traditional and patriarchal society. In particular, a patriarchal social and family system is claimed to have affected a number of the determinants of fertility, such as large family and including sex selection. The same applies to the pronatalist philosophy of the communist government, which is claimed to have been so widely accepted only because it played into an already pervasive positive attitude toward childbearing. In this way, women are considered to have not received increased autonomy and decision-making power with respect to their reproductive capacity, even though they attain status and increased power and in work and education. However, especially in Albanian context, we must not lose sight of a more important and more active yet hidden role of female agency. Actually, whatever the method of birth control, and we know what are the method, what were and what still are the method of birth control without access to modern contraception, highly restricted access to abortion and so on. And despite the traditionalist discourse of cultural activism of which I mentioned, or the pronatalist policy of a powerful central government, the dramatic decline of Albanian total fertility, which mentioned by Aryan, could not have been ensured without the democratization of gender relation and without an important proactive role of female agency. Of course, marriage is still universal. However, not only marriage is universal, but also first child is universal.
That's Eastern European context.
Yeah. However, new data, as you know better than me, show that, for example, in Kosovo, 98.2% plan to use contraception for the future. In Albania, 73% report they do not